Good afternoon, everyone. So let's just begin with today's class. Uh, so we have been discussing about the uh, essential elements for an active petroleum system. We talked about source rock, and we have discussed different properties about the reservoir rocks. So the properties that we have discussed so far are porosity, permeability, net to gross, hydrocarbon saturation. I think that's all we have discussed in terms of the essential properties necessary for the for a good reservoir rock. Okay, and we have also talked about hydrocarbon contact, and we said there are different types of contact, be it GOC, GWC, or OWC, so on and so forth. And we said how we can determine such contacts. We can determine such contacts from resistivity well logs, resistivity probes that we have discussed, because hydrocarbon has higher resistivity than water. Hence, there is a sharp drop in the resistivity curve wherever there is a contact between hydrocarbon and water. And the same thing can be figured out from pressure data from the and such pressure data are called RFT data. RFT, I'll just write it for you. Pressure data has a special name, which we call as RFT, or repeat formation test. Yeah, that's what. So pressure data, in general, in technical terms, is called repeat formation test data. Okay, and then we observe different gradients of the fluid pressure. Wherever I see that such gradients do change, for example, here 0.45 psi per feet is depicting the water gradient, and similarly 0.14 psi per feet depicts the gas gradient. Okay. In terms of bar, such um, gradients can be around 1.15 bar per 10 meter. That is your water gradient. And this is also called hydrostatic gradient. And for gas, that the one that is put there in terms of psi per feet, it can be also expressed in gram. This can be 0.2 bar, 0.2 bar. Now, of course, oil has, and this is typical gas pressure gradient. For oil, it generally varies. Yeah. This is essentially with a range. Depends on the oil specific gravity. And you remember we talked about it. We can find light oil and we can find heavy oil. If the light oil, so hence I'm not putting a particular number for you. So it generally varies. For light oil, there is a number, and for heavy oils, as the density increases or the viscosity increases, it has a very different gradient. Okay. But these are typical gradients for water, and this is typical gradient for gas. Now, this 1.15 bar per 10 meter, is this constant? Not particularly. So it depends on, the water gradient depends on the dissolved salt, okay, in water. The concentration of dissolved salt. So depends on concentration of dissolved salt. Okay, if the dissolved salt is almost negligible, so that means it's almost like fresh water, then the gradient can be around 1 bar per 10 meter. And if it is very, very saturated with salt, then it can go all the way up to 1.17, 1.18, even up to 1.19 bar per 10 meter. Okay, so that means it's quite saturated with salt. Okay, but if the salt is not that much in the water, then the gradient is around 1 bar per 10 meter. Okay, and then what we talked about is the volumetric calculation. And let me just talk about it once more. Uh, so the total volume is expressed by two particular quantities. One we call as STOIP, or stock tank oil initially in place. That means the hydrocarbon present, the volume of hydrocarbon present in a particular reservoir. And that is a product of GRV. GRV refers to gross rock volume. So, say for example, if I have, if the area of the reservoir is say 5 square kilometer, and then the thickness is 5 meter, so your total gross rock volume will be 5 square kilometer multiplied by 5 meter. Okay, so that much meter cube. Okay, so that will provide me my gross rock volume, area multiplied by the thickness. Okay, and then multiplied by net to gross ratio. Net to gross, as we said, it refers within the total reservoir thickness, how much is my net sand, how much will actually pay or contribute to the hydrocarbon that will come out of the reservoir. Okay, so that is my net to gross multiplied by porosity multiplied by oil saturation. Okay, oil saturation means 1 minus SW then, right? Because we do generally find from resistivity log is SW. SW is water saturation. Then oil saturation is 1 minus SW. Okay, multiplied by 1 by DO. DO is essentially the expansion factor. So, as you know, for example, water is completely incompressible. Okay, so if you even if you put a lot of pressure, water doesn't really change its volume. You know, the volume change is almost insignificant. Okay, but gas do really change its volume. So if you find, reacting to the Boyle's law and Charles' law, if we take, say for example, 1 liter of gas and bring it down to a depth of 3000 meter, the volume will change simply because I am changing the pressure and changing the temperature. PV is equals to nRT. You have all read in school, right? Now, so the gas. So if I just don't include this factor in this calculation, what will happen if I just say net to gross multiplied by GRV multiplied by porosity multiplied by gas saturation, that will provide me the gas volume which is inside the reservoir, right? Which we have not taken out. Now, that is not of any economic use, right? We need to understand when the gas comes out to the surface, what sort of volume uh, it will take, right? And that volume is essential to calculate. I mean, that volume is something that we will use. We are not so much interested about the compressed volume. Hence, we must uh, actually use this gas expansion factor. Okay, of course, the effect of the oil expansion factor is not as drastic as gas, but still oil is more compressible than water, right? So there will be some sort of expansion if we take oil out of the reservoir. So hence you should also include the oil expansion factor into your calculation. Okay, and of course, heap is gas initially in place, and STOIP is stock tank oil initially in place. Okay, I hope this particular calculation is clear for you. Okay, and how GRV is calculated, as we said, area multiplied by thickness. Net to gross we talked about. It's generally done from the Gamma logs, right? And you initially calculate the V shell, and then 1 minus V shell is your net to gross multiplied by porosity. Porosity is also calculated from different types of logs. We will discuss it later on, but for the timing, porosity is the amount of void space present in that rock. And then, of course, oil saturation is, we explained that this is inscribed in this picture itself, that all the void spaces are not taken by hydrocarbon. There are some residual water still present in that pore space. So we must multiply that with oil saturation, the percentage of oil present in that pore space. So this will be 1 minus SW, SW being water saturation, which is calculated from the resistivity log, and then you multiply that with the gas expansion or the oil expansion factor. Okay, and then we also talked about ultimate recovery, and we said there are many factors on which ultimate recovery will depend. Let us just quickly discuss what are the factors. Say, for example, this is my reservoir, okay? Okay. And so I have calculated the gross, I have calculated the STOIIP, okay? That is the total volume of oil present in this reservoir, okay? And then I say, for example, I drill one well here. Okay, I drill one well here and I want to know how much oil I will be ultimately be able to recover. Okay, so what is the recoverable volume, right? What is my RV? What is my recoverable volume? Okay, so what we will do, we will calculate STOIIP with something called RF, which is my recovery factor, right? Which is expressed in percentage, right? Recovery factor. And this recovery factor will, of course, depend on many factors. One of them, so, is a function of many factors, but one of them is, of course, permeability. What else it will depend on? It will depend on, of course, number of wells. If I drill more number of wells, my recovery factor will increase, right? Okay, so number of wells. Okay, it will also depend on if we are doing any sort of a treatment. Okay, so say for example, if I start fracking this reservoir, okay, my permeability will increase. So if I do fracking, my recovery factor will increase. So treatment is also a factor. So all these things will determine how much recovery factor I will have, and then I will multiply that with my STOIIP to find out something called UR, or ultimate recovery. So this is the amount of oil or gas that will come out of the reservoir, which is of our use. So STOIIP is something which is theoretically present inside the reservoir, and UR is the ultimate recovery, is the volume that comes out to the surface, right? So at this moment, let me just ask you if you have any question or everything was clear. Please ask. Could you repeat? What did you say? Could you repeat what is K in that RF equation? K is the permeability. Yeah, K is permeability. Because K is permeability, right? Or we call it simply permeability. So if my reservoir has a very good permeability, then of course I will be able to drain more hydrocarbon out of it. Okay. If the permeability is less, then I will not be able to drain as much of hydrocarbon as I intend to, right? So the recovery factor will decrease. If I have a higher permeability reservoir, recovery factor will increase. If I have a lower permeability reservoir, my recovery factor will decrease. If I drill more wells, I will be able to take out more hydrocarbons, so my recovery factor will increase. If I treat the reservoir, of course, then also my recovery factor will increase. Okay, is that clear? Shivangi, is that clear? Okay. Anyone else? Any question? Okay. So there is another thing that actually can enhance ultimate recovery, and I will just talk about it right now. Say, for example, this is my reservoir, okay? And this is the well, and this is the very first well that I have drilled right now, okay? And let us have that example with only one well, but just for simplicity, okay? And once I start producing from this well, okay, so start of production, start of production. So at the very start of production, let us say the pressure of the reservoir was P1. Now let us say after time delta t, I have taken out of the reservoir a volume of delta V. Okay, so this is after time t, I have taken out hydrocarbon of the reservoir, which is of volume delta V. So what will happen to pressure P1? Will it be maintained or will it decrease? Can someone tell me? Will the pressure decrease or will the pressure stay the same? So if I simply, it will decrease, right? So if I try to draw a pressure versus time curve, and suppose this is my P1, that's my initial pressure, or PI, that is my initial pressure. That is where I start with. With time, my pressure will decrease, right? Keep on decreasing. Now, say for example, I shut this well. Okay. Now I shut this well. Okay. That means I stop my production. If I stop my production, what will happen to PR? So now say for suppose this is my PT. Okay. After time T, PI has become PT. Okay. And then I say I will stop production. What will happen to the pressure? Will it stay at PT? So why will it not? Okay. The pressure will actually increase. So what it means, you can think of it that, with time, fluid from other parts of the reservoir will start to flow into the reservoir. Okay. Now, if I stop this one, with time, PT will again start to rise. Okay. And it will tend to reach PI. Okay. It will tend to reach PI. Now, how much time it will take? That depends again on this is also how much time this will take. This time is also a function of permeability, right? If it is a very highly permeable reservoir, then this recovery time for the pressure to build up again and become PI will be shorter, right? And if it is a low permeability reservoir, then it will take more time to come to an equilibrium. Is that clear? Okay. Now, in a normal situation, this will happen after the field life is kind of ended, right? Say, for example, we know that we will not have, I mean, we will not be able to take out any more hydrocarbons. Then there will be a phase of abandonment. Okay, and then I will shut off my wells. Okay, once we know that we have taken out all the hydrocarbon that we needed. Okay, but before that, there is no question of abandonment. What I will do essentially, I will keep on drilling more wells, right? I will keep on drilling more wells into the reservoir. So this situation is not essentially, this situation is not essentially arriving, right? So what will happen with increase of more and more well, what I will observe that my pressure is keeping on decreasing. And then there will be a time where pressure is extremely low, PF. The pressure is extremely low. Now tell me something, whether it is easier to drain hydrocarbon when the pressure was PI or when the pressure is PF. When it was easier to drain the hydrocarbon, okay, which part have you not understood, Shivangi? Can you just tell me? Which part have you not understood? Just speak up. Okay, increase in pressure means, say, for example, if you shut off the well, so that means there is no outflow, right? If you shut off the well, there is no outflow. So if there is no outflow, what will happen? That reservoir will act like an infinite reservoir, and hence hydrocarbon from other parts of the reservoir will come very close to the well, right? And the pressure will increase. But there is no outflow. There is inflow, but there is no outflow. Hence, the pressure will equilibrate, right? But then that doesn't happen. Or I mean, at the very initial stage of the production. So you keep on drilling wells, right? So if you keep on drilling wells, that means you will keep on decreasing the reservoir pressure. Now, if you keep on decreasing the reservoir pressure, you have to tell me whether it is easier to drain the reservoir when the pressure was PI or whether it is decreased to PF. When it is easier to take the hydrocarbon out when the pressure was PI, simply because it's easier to drain something from higher pressure, right? It's easier to drain it from a higher pressure. So there will be a time when that PF reaches that it will be almost impossible to take the hydrocarbon out of the system. Okay? So the pressure is so low that I'm not being able to take the hydrocarbon out. Okay? And what do we do in those cases? Okay. So PF is so low, there is a situation that I am not being able to take the hydrocarbon out. But that doesn't mean that all the hydrocarbon, whatever is left, the volume, whatever is left inside the reservoir, has been exhausted. It is still there. Only that the pressure has decreased so much that it becomes very inconvenient to take the hydrocarbon out. So how to overcome that problem? So to overcome that problem, we actually take up a particular process, and that is what we call as number one is called water injection. Okay? So what is water injection? So suppose, for example, this was my producer well. This was also my producer well. Now this was also my producer well. Now what I have done, that I have converted this. So producer well means the flow of the fluid is from the reservoir towards the outside, right? So this is how it is. This was perhaps was also a producer well. Now I have converted this well to an injector well. Okay, I stands for here injector. Injector well. Okay, so that what does that mean? That now the fluid, what I will do, I will take water from outside and I will forcibly pump it into the reservoir. Okay. So once I start injection, what will happen to my PF card? My pressure will also start to increase, and it will reach to a point when I will be able to take out hydrocarbon from these producer wells. Now an injector well can be a producer well can be converted to an injector well, or a producer well or a new injector well can be drilled. Okay? So now you see, if I am doing water injection into the system, what I am also doing, that I am increasing my ultimate recovery. So water injection also increases ultimate recovery, right? Because without water injection, I would have not been able to take out as much as gas as possible. Okay. So there is one way, which is water injection, by which you can enhance the ultimate recovery. Okay. So where would you drill an injection well? Now, if I look at this picture, and let us just increase this one. Okay. So where would I put my producer well? Was it clear? Whatever we have discussed so far, was it clear about the concept of water injection? Was it clear? Okay, excellent. Now, where would I put my production well? I will put my production well, of course. You see, I'll put my production well in the gas or oil leg, right? So this is my production well. This is my production well. What will happen if I put my production well? You know, I say, for example, I put my production well here. Okay. So as if, you know, it goes through the hydrocarbon leg, and then it also cuts the water leg. I can extend this actually till further to get more recovery. Okay. But then if I do something like this, what will happen? Can you tell me? What will happen in the second case? If I put my injection well, through the gas or oil leg, and then continue all the way up to water leg, what will happen? So I'll produce gas initially or oil initially, and then very quickly I will start producing water. But I don't want to produce water, right? I don't want to produce water from these wells. My intention is to produce oil or gas. Okay. So what I will do, where would I? So this is a production well. This cannot be a production well, and we should actually put the injector well here. So this is where I will put my injector. This is where I will put my injector. Now I will ask you one. Yeah. Now I will ask you one very interesting question. Okay. Say, I told you that, think about it and tell me the answer. Think about it. This is tricky to answer actually. I told you that I can convert a production well to an injector well, right? I told you that. Okay. And where what I said, that the production well should be ideally placed in the gas leg, right? Should be placed in the gas leg. And if I put it in the water leg, it will start producing water. Okay. And I said strategically you should put your injector well in the water leg, right? Then how come we can convert the production well to a to an injector well? So what would happen that would allow me to actually convert a production well to a injector well? Was the question clear, or the paradox clear with you? That see, here I ask you to put my production well, right? And then I am asking you to convert this one into an injector well. But that would not make sense, because if I start, if this is in the gas lake, and if I start producing water, it will not do anything to the reservoir, or take a long time to do the do the trick, increase the pressure. Then how would I convert my production well to an injector well? The injector well should ideally be placed in the water lake. So, was my recommendation wrong? What do you think? Answer, anyone, please. Absolutely. So, what happens if I keep on producing the gas from the gas lake? This hydrocarbon contact, here it is GWC, for example. This is GWC. What would happen to the GWC? The GWC will keep on moving up, right? Because I have started producing already. So the GWC will not be there anymore. The GWC will keep on moving up. Okay. So if it keeps on moving up, there will be some production wells. Say for example, maybe not this one. Maybe if I had a production well here, if a production well was here, the one which was in the oil or gas lake is now completely in the water lake. So no problem in converting this particular production well to an injector well. But I will not be able to do the same for perhaps this one if the hydrocarbon contact has migrated here, because this is still in the gas lake, right? So this is how you will be able to choose which production well you can actually convert to a an injector well. Yeah, is that discussion clear, everyone? Could I explain you properly? Pratichi, was it clear? I think it was clear for you. That's why you have heard. Anyone else? Vanshika, was it clear for you? Okay, excellent. Okay, so this is the way you can enhance also ultimate recovery. How else you can enhance ultimate recovery is, and this happens only for your okay, there are few more ways by which you can enhance your ultimate recovery. One is, we talked about, let me just clear the canvas first. We talked about the Barmer field, you remember? The Barmer field, which is in Rajasthan, and we said this is extremely heavy oil. Heavy oil means it has a very high density. It's so heavy that you can almost take it. I mean, pull it up in your hand. So it's very waxy. It's very waxy. It has a lot of wax content into it. So how you can take out such? So if you do normal type of drilling and taking out, well, maybe recovery may be 1 or 2%. Okay, the ultimate recovery, my recovery factor is 1 or 2%. I mean, most of the hydrocarbon is still left inside the porous spaces. Okay, but how would you be able to take out more hydrocarbon from it? Is by doing something called steam injection. Okay, steam injection. Okay, so that also increases your ultimate recovery. Okay, increases ultimate recovery. How? What is done in steam injection? You actually simply push very hot steam water vapor inside, and that water vapor, while interacts with the fluid of the reservoir, it actually melts the wax. Okay? It melts the wax, and then the oil, whatever was present um, in that reservoir, will be more lighter, and by that way you will be able to take out the oil. So steam injection also increases ultimate recovery. Okay, but these are all secondary treatments, like injection, like like water injection, like steam injection. These are all the secondary treatment that you are providing to the reservoir so that you can increase your ultimate recovery. How else you can increase ultimate recovery uh, is called gas injection. And this has a very different physics behind it. Okay, so what happens, say for example, when the pressure actually decreases, when pi becomes pf, okay, the pressure actually decreases. Okay, instead of water injection, what you can also do, you can inject. So it's like, for example, it's like, so this is your production well. This is your production well. And then you can also inject gas. Instead of water, you inject gas. And then from here, actually a mixture of oil plus gas comes out. So what this gas does, while it mixes up with the oil, it decreases the viscosity. Okay, it decreases viscosity, and hence it also enhances the oil to come up. Okay, by that also you can increase the ultimate recovery. So now gas injection, water injection, steam injection, all these processes have a, so let me just put it here. So gas injection plus water injection plus steam injection, all these things together is put under a specific term, which we call as EOR or EGR. This process is called EOR or EGR. EOR stands for enhanced oil recovery. Okay, enhanced oil recovery, and EGR stands for enhanced gas recovery. Okay, now as a student of petroleum geology, these acronyms are extremely important to know. These acronyms are so, if you interact with someone in the industry, you have to know about these acronyms. Okay, so enhanced oil recovery. So no one will say enhanced oil recovery; they will just say EOR or EGR, and then in your mind this picture of all these three processes that I have just described in terms of oil, water injection, in terms of steam injection, and in terms of gas injection should come into play. Okay, and these are all the processes which enhances ultimate recovery. Okay, was it clear? Was this whole discussion clear? How ultimate recoveries can be enhanced? Okay, excellent. Now, let's proceed with the presentation. So we have not yet talked about all the elements, right? We still need to talk about the trap, the migration system, and everything. Now, some of you are familiar with this particular picture. Some of you are not. Okay. So I will explain what you are looking at, and I will also explain. Um, I will also explain briefly how it is taken. But later on, both in your solid earth geophysics class and as well as in petroleum geology class, in petroleum geology, we will mostly do the interpretation part, but in the and subsequent calculations. But in the solid earth geophysics course, of course, those who have not done yet, you will learn about this technique of seismic. Okay, how it works. So what you are looking at here is essentially is a two-dimensional picture of the subsurface. Okay, so what do I mean by two-dimensional picture? Is simply this, that suppose this is the top part of the earth. Okay, the top part of the earth, and we have absolutely no clue what is underneath, right? So here is my top part of the earth, and here we are. And we want to look beneath the surface. Yeah. So we want to know whether the rocks that we are looking at underneath, whether they are simply horizontal or whether they are dipping, whether there is a fault, whether there is a fold. Okay? We want to know about them because it is very important to know, and we also want to know whether this is sandstone, whether this is shell, whether this is basalt. Okay? We want to know about them. Now, how do we know? Because we cannot go there, right? And say, for example, it is 3 kilometers, we cannot also excavate and take everything out and like make a section like you see in the field. That is not possible. So you have to gather information from inside. So one of the things that you can do simply is, as I was explaining, that you can drill a well. Okay, you can drill a well and then take cores out. Cores are simply like the cylindrical piece of rock that you can take out while you drill a well, right? Now, you know what is the maximum diameter it can have? It's at the very bottom, very top of the hole, it is around 25.4 inches. Okay, and then at the very bottom, it is around 3.14 inches. Okay, at the very bottom, it's around 3.14. So let's just go with 2.154 inches because it's pretty large. Now, if it is 2.54 inches, and if this is, say, 20 kilometers, I'm just giving you a pessimistic estimate. What percentage of information have you collected? Can you tell me? What percentage of information have you collected? It's negligible, right? I mean, it almost doesn't make sense. I mean, it's like a hairline information, right? Are you convinced that it's the information that we can observe from a from a well? It's a hairline information compared to the spread of the field. Okay, it's hairline. Okay, you can tell me that maybe I will drill, more wells. I will drill another well here, drill another well here, another well here, another well here. Okay. Okay, I drill like 10 wells, but remember, the well costs around $20 million, right? So the more you drill, the more you spend. But you still have to make money out of the oil and gas that you need to get out of it, right? So there is a limit to which you can drill wells as well. So your company will not allow you to drill as many wells as you want, right? So you have to show the economics. So once you present a well proposal, there must be solid economics behind it. How much information are we going to get out of it? By the way, the wells right now we are talking about are what type of wells? Where you gather information, what type of wells are they? We talked about 4 types of well: wildcat, exploration, production, and appraisal. What sort of wells are they? The wells that are used to gather information.
Wildcat.
Sorry?
Wildcat.
Okay, it can be wildcat, exploration, and appraisal. All three of them actually are used to gather information only, right? Only the production well is used to produce oil and gas. And today you have learned about a different type of well, which is the injection well, right? Now, okay, so they could be wildcat wells, they could be exploration wells, they could be also appraisal wells. Okay. Now, the another interesting point. So there is a restriction to the number of wells that you can drill. Okay. Then there is another point. Say, for example, I have drilled this well, and say, for example, I have got this whole core, which is also very optimistic proposition. I mean, you don't get the whole core out. So for the sake of argument, if I say I get the whole code out, you see how my so if I just look into the code here, how the code will appear. The code will appear like two horizontal and then with these inclined beds. Does it reflect the fold? No, you don't see the fold. You completely miss the fold. Yeah, you just see some inclined beds. Are you with me? If I just take out code here, I will not be able to see the fold. Actually, there is not a single place with a single well I will be imaged that fold. But we have just learned that you need to have a potential trap. And such folds can be very good traps. Right? So it's important to know about this position of this particular fold. Right? So we need to have some technology by which we can get more information. We can get a clearer picture, so that I should be able to, know about the disposition of these layers along this line, along this line, along this line, along this line, maybe along this line, along this line. All the layers, I can see all the layers. Maybe I can get a picture of all the layers along all these lines. Maybe we call these lines as in lines, and we call these lines as cross lines. Okay. Along all the in lines and cross lines, I want to actually image the subsurface, right? And how would I image the subsurface? We generally take out images and these are called acoustic images. Okay, acoustic images means suppose at point A And so this is, say, for example, this is point A and then point B. I send from point A some sort of acoustic signal. Acoustic signal means shock wave, elastic wave, and then due to the presence of different layers, which we will discuss, it behaves very differently, and we get a picture. Okay, like ultrasound. Okay, for the timing, remember, like they are ultrasound pictures. Okay, they are not exactly ultrasound, but they're very close to ultrasound pictures. For example, I'm shooting ultrasounds, and then I'm getting the beautiful picture of the subsurface. And this is one such picture. And this is what we call a seismic image. So this is a seismic image. And this actually represents one such lines. It can be a inline, I mean it's written here inline, or it could be a cross line. It doesn't matter for the time being. Okay. It can be an inline or it can be a cross line. This is, for the time being, remember, this is simply like a ultrasound picture of the subsurface along that line. Okay, how these images are created, how these images are processed, how these images are interpreted, we will of course discuss in due course. But for the timing, remember, this is a picture. And as I think you have seen enough geological picture, you can start making sense out of this picture. Okay, and you can see here, so this is where the depth increases. So this is the most shallowest part, I mean, the surface of the earth, and then the depth essentially increases. Okay, and you can see these layers are, perhaps gently folded, very gentle folding, and then you can spot some discontinuities, some faults. Okay, if you have a trend eye, I will show you after the course. Of course, you will have a trend eye. You will be able to do it by yourself, but for the timing, remember, perhaps whatever you are seeing here is perhaps salt, you know, salt. And here is your reservoir. Here is your sandstone reservoir. From where? So you have to, if you want to actually take hydrocarbon out, what you have to do, you have to drill a well which runs from here to here, okay? All the way here. And this is where you will be able to take the water, hydrocarbon out, right? Now, the salt layer that I have been talking about is extremely important. So in this particular case, this is an example from North Sea. Okay, this reservoir is called Rotliegend Reservoir. This is of Permian age. This is of Permian age. By the way, how many of you can remember geological time scale? If not, I will urge you that at least the larger subdivisions, it should be at your fingertips. Okay. If I say Permian, it should immediately bring out what sort of ages, what sort of million years ago we are talking about. Okay. If I say Permian and if I say Jurassic, you should be able to tell me which one is older, which one is younger. I think with my constant pondering over it, I think my fourth year students are right now at this moment. Okay, let me ask Aniket, what is the age of Permian? What is the tentative age of Permian? You are not supposed to look into your internet, Aniket. Just tell me 298 million years. Okay, that's very precise. All right, so you see, what I want you, all my third year students right now, or whomever others have who are not have done it yet, you must have a brief idea about the corresponding ages of the geological time scale, okay, and the major events associated with it. Okay, when did the human being come? When did the mammal came? When the dinosaurs went extinct? When the land plants came? When which was the time when coal actually became most prolific? Okay, so there are some when the vertebrate animals came into picture. When did the reptiles came? Okay, What was the time when hard shell animal came into the picture? Okay, so all these major breakthroughs that happened in the earth, in the history of the earth, you must know about them. And it's not only about petroleum geology, it's about, if you want to continue with geology, whatever it is, you have to have your geological time scale pretty much in place in your mind. Okay, and I tell this to all my students, and I have to repeat it for the new students again. First you will see, as you are right now joining your degree and the department, you will see there are plenty of streams of earth sciences. I mean, if we leave the environmental science out for the time being, in geology itself you will be exposed to geophysics, structural geology, your metamorphic, igneous, um, sedimentology, you name it. I mean, all sorts of stratigraphy, different branches of geology. Okay, and they are really sometimes can be very overwhelming. Okay? But as a student, what you must remember, that you want to become a geologist first. What does that mean? That it should not happen that you grasp one particular subject very well, but then you don't have any idea, or you are completely weak in the other subject, because the advantage or disadvantage, whatever you may say in geology, that one is highly dependent on the other. Okay, so I mean, you have to know about the rocks to know about its behavior, right? So I urge you that you of course you will develop your own interest in a particular subject, and there is no harm in that. But try to have a very good overall idea about everything. Okay? That's absolutely important. And one of the key steps in achieving such goal is to grasp your geological time scale. What are the things? What are the major events that happened throughout the time? Okay. All right. So if we just try to continue this discussion, there is an electric switch off right now. But are you all there, guys? Can someone just tell me if you are there? Okay, excellent. Because there was a load shedding in the department, so I thought I lost you. Okay. Anyway, so if you see the salt layer, okay, and this salt layer essentially is the cap layer that we have been talking about, because the sandstone that is a reservoir rock, so it has high porosity, high permeability. But if this salt layer would have not been on the top of this sand layer, what would have happened? That all the hydrocarbon which was generated in the source rock came to the reservoir rock would not have stopped at the reservoir rock. It would have simply, been leaked away. Yeah, it would have not been there. It would have been leaked away. But what the salt layer has done, it has actually, because salt has very low porosity and very low permeability. What salt has done, it has actually stopped its vertical migration. So in this particular case, this salt, and which is also called Zechstein salt, this particular salt's name is Zechstein. Okay? This particular salt has actually stopped the vertical movement of the hydrocarbon to leak it out from the reservoir level. So there is a particular measure which is used for the understanding the sealing potential of a particular rock, and that is calculated by mercury injection capillary pressure. We will talk about mercury injection capillary pressure, of course. For the time being, let us say that this is a measure of the what differential pressure it takes to migrate a fluid through rock. Okay, higher the value, better the seal. So there is some sort of test that you do on a particular piece of rock to understand whether the mercury injection capillary pressure is higher or lower. If it is higher, we say it's a good quality seal. But if you have not understood this particular last point, don't worry, I will explain about mercury injection capillary pressure in better details when we look more into into the Caprock. Okay. So I stop my presentation right now, or the class right now. If you have any question or doubt, please ask. I'll be happy to answer. Anyone? Sir, what is the percentage of recovery amount in water injection and gas injection methods? It depends, man. I mean, it can be all the, I mean, it can be around 5%, 10%, but not more than 25 to 30%. Okay? It depends very much on the case to case basis, but it never goes beyond 30%. But that's a good question. Anything else? You are welcome. Anything else? All right. If there are no further questions, then I will stop it here, and I will, of course, upload the video today itself.